Dawn breaks over the valley near Vaslui as a pale smear behind a wall of fog. The world is reduced to silhouettes and muffled sound. The creak of wagons, the dull rhythm of thousands of boots, the snorts of horses drawing breath that smokes in the air. Columns of Ottoman soldiers push forward between snow-packed ridges, convinced this is the march before an easy victory over a minor principality. They see no banners ahead, no enemy lines, only a narrow road threading through white silence. High above them on the ridges, Stephen and his smaller army wait, motionless, half buried in snow and earthworks carved weeks before. Every slope, every bend in the frozen river, each patch of marsh beneath that smooth white skin has been chosen, measured, and turned into a weapon. For a few final heartbeats, the valley holds its breath. Then the war horns sound, arrows rip from the fog like black rain. Cannon flashes strobe through the mist, thunder rolling from unseen heights. Men stumble, shields splinter, horses rear as the river ice buckles under panicked weight. By the time the fog begins to thin, the myth of Ottoman invincibility is already fading in the snow. A small nation has just slammed shut the gateway into Europe. Long before the fog sealed the valley at Vaslui, Europe had been living under a gathering shadow. In the mid-1400s, borders shifted like sand, and every court whispered about the same rising force to the south, the Ottoman Empire. Only a generation earlier, its armies had taken Constantinople, turning the old Byzantine capital into the glittering heart of an expanding power that now pressed into the Balkans year after year. Fortresses that had stood for centuries fell in a season. Kingdoms that once thought themselves secure suddenly found Ottoman banners flying at their borders. To many rulers, the empire seemed less like a state and more like a storm front. Dark, slow, and inevitable, rolling ever closer. On the maps spread across European tables, one small stretch of land stood at a dangerous crossroads, wedged between the Ottomans, the Kingdom of Hungary, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. That strip of forests, hills, and river valleys was Moldavia. Controlling it meant gripping the trade routes, the river crossings, and the roads that funneled straight into the heart of Central Europe. For the great powers, it was a strategic gateway. For Moldavia itself, it was a warning. One mistake, one miscalculation, could end its existence. Moldavia was not the kind of land empires feared at first glance. It was a patchwork of forests, rolling hills, and winding river valleys, dotted with wooden villages and stone churches that seemed too small to matter on a continental map. It had no sprawling capital, no endless lines of armored knights, no overflowing treasury to hire mercenaries by the thousands. What it did have was position. To the south lay the swelling power of the Ottomans, to the west, the Kingdom of Hungary, to the north and east, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and other Christian realms. Moldavia sat like a narrow hinge between them, a strip of earth through which caravans, envoys, and armies had to pass. Its ports on the Black Sea linked distant markets to inland trade. Its river crossings and passes stitched together the routes that would one day carry an invading army towards Central Europe. The ruler of this fragile crossroads was Stephen, later remembered as the Great, a prince who understood that his principality could not afford grandeur. It could only afford survival, day after day, with stronger neighbors watching from every horizon. For years, Stephen walked a razor's edge, trading pride for time. He paid tribute to Istanbul, sending gold and grain down the rivers as a gesture of loyalty. And in return, he asked for what every small ruler near an empire wants most, to be left alone. But the empire did not stay still. Each season seemed to tighten its grip. Tax demands grew heavier. Ottoman officials pressed harder for control of key ports like Chilia and Cetatea Alba, and requests that once sounded like negotiations began to feel like orders. Stephen watched neighboring rulers bend, compromise, and still lose fortresses, river towns, and finally their names on the map. Appeasement, he realized, was not a strategy. It was a slow surrender written in annual payments and signed at the border. Along Moldavia's frontier, tempers flared into clashes. Patrols that once nodded at each other across rivers now exchanged arrows. Disputes over who controlled a stone tower or a stretch of road erupted into skirmishes that left men dead in the snow. In Istanbul, Stephen's refusals and delays were no longer seen as caution, but as insolence. By late 1474, the decision was made far from Moldavia's hills. This troublesome principality would be punished, not persuaded. Somewhere in the Ottoman command, someone drew a line through Moldavia and planned to erase it. In the halls of Ottoman power, Moldavia's defiance was treated not as a nuisance, but as a threat to the empire's image. If one small principality could resist, others might follow. So the response was not a diplomatic note, but an order. Assemble a force that would crush Stephen in a single winter stroke. Hatem Suleiman Pasha, an experienced commander of the Sultan, received that command. From garrisons across the Balkans and along the Danube, units were recalled and redirected north. Supply officers calculated grain, fodder, and powder for tens of thousands of men. Engineers mapped bridges and river crossings that would carry artillery and baggage trains into Moldavian territory. In their planning rooms, the campaign looked simple: a short march, a broken prince, a new province added to the empire's map before the spring thaw. Stephen's scouts brought back the first hard numbers. A host many times larger than anything he could field was gathering like a dark tide along the Danube's banks. In that moment, any lingering dream of meeting the Ottomans in a proud, open-field battle died. If Moldavia tried to match that hammer blow head-on, it would shatter. The only hope was to make sure the hammer never found a solid target. Winter came down on Moldavia like a lid, sealing the land in ice and silence. Snow buried the fields and forest paths, turning roads into pale scars across the landscape. Most commanders would have delayed a campaign or prayed the enemy would wait for spring. Stephen did the opposite. He decided that if Moldavia was going to survive, winter itself had to become his ally. Villages near the southern border were quietly emptied. Families packed what they could carry and moved deeper inland. Barns that might have fed an invading army were stripped bare, their grain hauled away to hidden storehouses. Wells were covered, bridges weakened, and side paths through the woods were blocked or subtly altered so that Ottoman guides would trust maps that no longer matched the ground. Along the rivers, Stephen's men measured ice thickness, marking in their minds the stretches where weight would hold and where it would crack under panic. Through it all, there was no uprising, no open despair. The people understood the stakes. They had lived under the empire's shadow long enough to know that this was the price of making the land serve them instead of the invaders. While the land was being hardened into a trap, Stephen reshaped the army that would spring it. He knew Moldavia could not outgun or outnumber an imperial host, so he built something the Ottomans were not prepared to fight: a force made for speed, angles, and invisibility. Heavy cavalry in rigid formations gave way to light horsemen, riders who could move like shadows across snow and forest, striking deep at a column's flank and then vanishing before a countercharge could form. Archers drilled until they could loose from horseback at a gallop or from behind ridges where only the arc of their arrows betrayed their presence. Around Stephen himself, an iron core of elite guards stood ready, men he would commit only when one decisive blow could break the enemy's will. Even the peasant levies, men with patched armor and simple gear, were woven into the plan. They knew every stand of trees, every bog, every hidden track between farms and hilltops. Under other commanders, they might have been thrown forward as expendable ranks. Under Stephen, their knowledge of Moldavia itself became a weapon sharper than many swords. As the snow deepened and the Ottoman camps swelled along the Danube, Stephen looked beyond his borders for a shield that might share the blow. Envoys rode to the courts of Poland, Hungary, and other Christian princes, carrying letters that did not beg but warned. If Moldavia fell, the road to their own frontiers would lie open. The replies came back wrapped in seals and fine words: sympathy from one king, cautious admiration from another, vague promises of help when circumstances allowed. None of them arrived with banners and steel. Stephen understood the message beneath the courtesies. Moldavia would stand largely alone. So he stopped waiting. Instead of racing to confront the Ottomans at the border, he allowed his main forces to slip from sight. Camps vanished into forests. Cavalry withdrew from obvious lines of advance, refusing big battles and offering only small, skittering clashes at the edges of the invading host. To Ottoman scouts, it looked like fear. To their commanders, it looked like a principality already bending at the knee. That illusion, carefully fed and never contradicted, was the first layer of the trap closing around them. Stephen's chosen battlefield was not an accident of geography, it was a design. Near the town of Vaslui, he found a valley shaped like a funnel, with marshy ground under the snow, flanking ridges overlooking a narrow floor, and a river that froze just enough to invite disaster. He studied it like an engineer studies blueprints. At dawn, Fog pooled low and thick, swallowing shapes at a few paces. Sound bounced strangely off the slopes, separating voice from direction. Under that white blanket, his men dug trenches and earthworks, then covered them with snow until the valley looked untouched. Archers were positioned behind ridges where they could fire unseen, while small cannons were mounted on sleds, ready to be dragged into place, fired, and slid back into cover before the enemy could answer. Meanwhile, light cavalry kept stinging the Ottoman advance. Brief raids on scouts, sudden strikes on supply wagons, then a swift disappearance into the trees. To the Empire, it looked like an opponent coming apart, lashing out in panic as it retreated. To Stephen, it was the final layer of bait. Every step the Ottomans took toward Vaslui convinced them they were chasing a broken foe, not walking into a valley built to swallow armies. When the Ottoman army finally crossed into Moldavia in December, it moved like a great machine grinding forward through snow and ice. Columns of soldiers and pack animals trudged along roads that seemed deserted, past villages with doors barred and windows dark, as if life itself had stepped aside. The deeper they pushed, the harsher the march became. Wheels jammed in frozen ruts, horses slipped on hidden ice, and the cold climbed through boots and armor until it felt like a second, merciless skin. Yet there was always just enough promise ahead to keep them moving. Rumors of untouched settlements near Vaslui, of barns still full and houses not yet burned. Now and then, a sudden arrow volley or a quick cavalry raid would tear into a flank, killing men and then vanishing into the trees before a response could form. To weary commanders, these attacks looked like the flailing of a cornered enemy, too weak to stand and too frightened to flee properly. Their maps said they were closing on Moldavia's heart. Their instincts told them the worst was already behind them. The valley ahead looked narrow, yes, but also like a shortcut to victory. Before dawn on January 10th, 1475, the valley near Vaslui disappeared. A dense, frozen fog rolled in from the river and the marshes, spilling over the ridges until the world narrowed to a few ghostly steps and the faint outline of the man beside you. For Stephen, this was not bad luck. It was the exact condition he had counted on. His soldiers lay in their positions along the slopes and behind their snow-capped earthworks, breathing quietly, fingers curled around bowstrings and spear shafts gone stiff with cold. No campfires burned, no torches flickered. From the valley floor, there was nothing to see but white. The first hint that the Ottomans were approaching came as vibration before sound, the faint trembling of the ground under tens of thousands of synchronized footsteps. Then the noise followed, the creak of wagons, the jangle of harness metal, the low murmur of men who could not even see the front of their own column. As the Empire's army poured into the narrow space, the fog thickened around them, swallowing banners, blurring officers' gestures into shapeless shadows. Somewhere above, horns waited in frozen hands. The valley had closed its jaws. All that remained was for Stephen to bite down. The signal came not as a shout, but as a sound that seemed to rise from the bones of the valley itself. The long, low bellow of Moldavian war horns rolling through the fog. One answered another, then another, until the Ottomans could no longer tell where anything was coming from. A heartbeat later, the sky turned lethal. Arrows hissed out of the white void in great unseen waves, slamming into ranks that could barely lift their shields in time. Men cried out without knowing which way to turn. Officers barked orders that vanished into the mist, swallowed before they reached the end of a line. Then the cannon spoke. Small mobile guns hidden high on the ridges thundered to life, flashes of orange briefly punching through the gray, followed by explosions that tore gaps in tightly packed columns. The blasts echoed off the slopes, making a handful of weapons sound like an entire battery. As the Ottomans tried to form a front, Moldavian light cavalry burst from the fog at their flanks, loosing arrows at close range, slashing with sabers, then pivoting away and disappearing as if the mist had eaten them. The Empire's disciplined infantry, trained for clear fields and visible foes, now swung at ghosts in a white maze they could neither map nor control. High on the ridge, Stephen waits until the Ottoman army is no longer an army, just a mass of men stumbling through noise and fear. Arrows have thinned their ranks, cannon fire has shattered their lines, and the fog has turned every shouted order into a confusing echo. When he finally lifts his hand, his trumpeters unleash a different sound, deep, rolling blasts that cut through the chaos like a knife. At that signal, Moldavia's main force surges forward. From the ridges, infantry and elite guards pour down the slopes in a dark wave. Shields locked, spears leveled, boots hammering the frozen earth. They slam into the disoriented Ottomans with the force of an avalanche, driving wedges into already broken formations. At the same time, Moldavian cavalry strikes again from the flanks, no longer darting in and out, but committing fully, pounding along the valley floor to crush pockets of resistance before they can form. Panic ignites. Driven by fear more than command, Ottoman soldiers surge toward the apparent safety of the frozen river. Under the pounding weight of armor and hooves, the ice groans, cracks, and then gives way in jagged lines. Men and horses plunge into black, killing water, dragging others down in their desperation to climb out. Those who reach the far bank find no refuge there. Moldavian riders have already circled behind, closing the last door. The great imperial host, so certain of victory that morning, is now a trapped, thrashing thing with nowhere left to run. By midday, the fog that had hidden the slaughter begins to thin, peeling back from the valley in slow, tattered veils. What it reveals does not look like the remains of a battle between equals. It looks like the aftermath of a collapse. Ottoman banners lie trampled in the snow, their colors soaked and dull. Broken cannon wheels jut from drifts, horses lie stiff in frozen harness, and the once ordered columns are reduced to scattered clusters of bodies and abandoned weapons. Stephen rides onto the field only when he is certain the enemy is broken. His horse picks its way through churned slush and shattered shields, while officers report in low voices which units have been destroyed and which remnants are fleeing south. He forbids wild pursuit. No victory is worth throwing men away on reckless glory. Instead, he sends small bands of scouts to shadow the retreat to make sure the great host does not somehow knit itself back together. Beyond the valley, villagers begin to emerge from the woods where they have been hiding. They move slowly at first, as if afraid the empire might still be standing there. Then they see Moldavian banners, torn but upright, and realize that against all odds, their country is still alive. That night, as darkness folds back over the valley of Vaslui, the true weight of what happened there begins to settle. In Stephen's camp, there is no wild celebration. Only exhausted men huddled around small, carefully shielded fires, bandaging wounds and whispering the same stunned thought: they stood against an empire and did not break. Stephen gathers his council in a lamplit tent, faces drawn and bruised but lit from within by a quiet, fierce pride. He speaks not of triumph, but of responsibility. This victory, he knows, is not just Moldavia's, it is a wall hastily rebuilt for all of Christendom. Before dawn, messengers ride out in every direction, carrying letters that describe Vaslui in cold, deliberate detail. The fog, the ambush, the shattered host that never reached the heart of Europe. In distant capitals, bells will ring and chroniclers will call Stephen a champion of the faith, a shield raised where greater kingdoms hesitated. Yet even as praise gathers beyond his borders, he orders ruined fortresses repaired, roads cleared, arms and grain stockpiled. He has wounded the empire, not slain it, and he knows it will come again. For now, though, as torches flicker along the ridges where peasants once waited in silence, one truth stands firm in the frozen air. Moldavia refused to die, and because it lived, the road into Europe remains closed, at least for one more winter.